Today I'll be showcasing my North Shoreline Interurban car. It's been quite a while since I've done a video in this sort of format. It's more of a low effort, quick recording, just showing off a piece of equipment. Nothing with voiceover or fancy editing or stuff like that. But I've gotten a couple of requests to take a look at this piece, and of course, I'd be more than happy to talk about it. So as you can tell, this is a North Shoreline Interurban car. Some people call them greenliners, but it is sort of the de facto workhorse interurban car of the North Shoreline. Like, for me, when I think of the North Shoreline Electric Railroad, I think of these interurban cars. Now, before I get into the technical details of this model, I guess I want to go over why I put it together in the first place. And that's because, well, I really love the North Shoreline. Ever since I found out that it was a thing, I hung on to it as one of my favorite railroads. Mostly because of locality. I do appreciate local history, regional history, and the North Shoreline fits the bill perfectly. And of course I was a little bit devastated when I found out that one of the stops on the Skokie Valley route would have been a 4-minute walk from my door if it still was around. But anyways, the North Shoreline is generally considered to be one of the best interurbans to have ever been built. And I can say I would agree with that. It had a lot of segments where there was some nice tracks, some top-notch overhead wire, good station architecture, and of course they had some really fantastic equipment. They had some good old freight motors like steeple cabs and stuff like that. They had the streamlined electroliners, which are absolutely beautiful, and what most people think of when they think of the North Shoreline. And then you have the inconspicuous 1 in a million interurban cars that the North Shoreline had. Most notably, for the few decades up until its demise, the North Shoreline had 2 major types of rolling stock on most of their local trains. And those would be the Silverliners and the retroactively named Greenliners, with this being one of the Greenliners. But as I've said, when I think of the North Shoreline, I don't immediately think of the flashy Electroliner. I immediately think of maybe a 5-car train of these heading down the Skokie Valley route. So after looking at dozens of pictures of these in my general area, going past landmarks that I'm familiar with, I've become very acquainted with them, and I wanted one of my own. And so I started sourcing parts for this thing. The main body here is a Lionel Baby Madison passenger car, which I actually didn't get from a passenger car. I got it from a MPC-era diner building from Lionel. Of course, the roof came with that diner, and so did the inserts, and as you can tell, there's actually scenes of waiters and chefs and people dining. And while that might not be entirely realistic for a commuter train, I think that the North Shoreline did have some dining car trains, which, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised because it was a railroad that served some fairly opulent areas, and they would definitely, you know, splurge on some fine dining while they're commuting to work. Then a lot of the more trolley-specific features were sourced from an MTH Brill semi-convertible trolley, like the trolley poles up here, all of the associated stuff that helps keep them in place, the hooks, and the trucks are also from a MTH Brill trolley, which I would have kept that trolley in one piece. However, the proto soundboard was having some weird, obscure problem that caused the whole thing to just not work, so I figured it'd be best to cut my losses and use the parts for something else. I've also neglected to mention that the sort of cowcatcher plow things on each end are also from that trolley. I'm not going to open this thing up, but the electronics inside here are pretty simple. All I used was a Lionel LTI era reversing board And I just wired that into the motor and into the pickups, and it works really well. A few considerations went into the sourcing of the parts. Of course, I wanted some trucks that looked like, well, Interurban trucks, and the closest thing I had was that Trolley. And I feel like they look pretty close, especially once you've painted them black. And the passenger car here is a nice size, as anyone who's familiar with the North Shoreline knows that their cars were actually pretty small so that they could navigate the curves on the L in Chicago. So an 027 passenger car body actually fits pretty well, and I feel like makes it scale with the other trains I have pretty good. For example, here is a South Shoreline car made by K-Line, and as you can see, it's quite a bit bigger, but that's how it was in real life. You know, the South Shoreline was more of a mainline type interurban, or at least it never ran on rapid transit lines, and the North Shoreline absolutely did run on rapid transit lines. Oh, and that reminds me, K-Line by Lionel actually did make a set of North Shoreline cars, but they used the tooling for the larger cars, and they look kind of weird in my opinion. They also just weren't the right shape or profile, and I feel like they wouldn't have been satisfactory for me. Of course, I had to make a few modifications to the body to make it realistic. I cut out the windows of each end here with a sort of a hot knife setup, and that worked rather well, just masking off where I wanted off and then cutting along those lines and sanding them. It turned out pretty clean. Adding on the headlight, trolley retrievers, little details like that on each end of the car. For the back truck, I had to hollow out a reasonable amount of the floor so I could stick the motor and the drive through it, and I also had to make my own little plate out of, I think I used an erector set part, like a flat sheet metal erector set part, and cut out a hole for the motor to ride in so it doesn't wear away the plastic. Now, in terms of the trolley poles, they do not pick up power from the wires. I think I've said this before, but for any new viewers, the wires actually do provide current for my trains that have pantographs, or at least most of them so far. Still got to do a few more conversions. But the thing is here, the trolley pole is very thin, and I don't think it'd conduct electricity very well at all. And it would get too hot, and, you know, other problems like that. And besides, I don't think it'd be very reliable anyways. A couple of things that I had to do for this trolley pole in order to get it to sit up on the wire right is make this weird little sort of horn piece on the top of the trolley pole, which you may be able to notice, but that just helps keep it on the wire. And then I added a little, this is actually pretty realistic detail, this trolley retriever rope, which helps keep it at a good height so it doesn't spring up if it de-wires, because if it springs up, it's going to get caught on some of the overhead line masts and screw everything up. So that was a precaution that I had to take, and also it looks more realistic. Once I was done with all of that, I ended up painting it in this nice sort of dark forest green, and then put on this bright red, which I think these colors really look wonderful together, and they certainly scream North Shoreline. But aside from painting the roof black, that was it. I had this car all together. So far, I haven't fitted it with a coupler, but I'm thinking that I'll mount one on the body sometime soon, and maybe buy another Baby Madison passenger car and convert it into another green liner or maybe a silver liner. We'll see about that. But it'd definitely be nice to have more than just a one-car set. Although this is technically prototypical, there were a lot of cases where one-car trains were ran on the North Shoreline. But I suppose to wrap this all up, this car gives me a lot of joy to run around the track. Reminds me of an era that I never got to see. And well, even though the track's all ripped up and the wires came down about 60 years ago, and well, I never got to see any of them, it's still nice to be able to run a Interurban car on my layout where I know the wires will never come down. So I hope you have a good day, and let's run this thing around the track.